I just give a little bit of background on myself. Maybe some of you have looked at me a little bit already, but I'm Dan, and recently I made a shift in my career. For almost 30 years now, I've been leading product teams at all kinds of different levels, and I got to a point where I decided, I think I want to have a different mode, and so I've flipped now to where I'm just really focused on coaching product executives, trying to help build better product teams, stuff like that. But I think part of this, I got to a point where I felt like my real passion and my highest happiness was around helping people grow in their careers, and so I've decided to focus on that full time. And my shorthand phrase for that is that the people that do product are my product. You can see, I've been really blessed in my life to work for some amazing companies. Most recently as Chief Product Officer at Lucid Software. Lucid has over 100 million users global around the world, the 11th most used business application in the world. And so we were fortunate to attain some scale at Lucid. I worked for a smart home technology company running product there called Vivint Smart Home, VP of product at Ancestry, led product operations at Adobe. And that's about half my career. There's many other companies where I did product before that. I'm really proud that I've got 6 wonderful children, my wife and 6 children. That tends to be the core of why I do what I do. And as an aside, I'm a really passionate photographer, and like to the order of last year I took like 350,000 photos. So I do a lot of photography. Today I just want to walk you through how we're gonna approach the topic. The first, I think it's really important whenever we talk about these principles of mastering the speed of learning, that it has to be done within a context and a framework. You don't learn just for learning's sake. There's a reason and a purpose of how you do it. So we'll talk about the high level, what is even the purpose of product management? Whether you have formal product managers in your company, the function must exist. And whether you're like wearing multiple hats and you're doing that, or whether you're at a bigger scale and you've hired people who are dedicated to doing that, the function and the purpose of product management must exist. And then I want to touch a little bit on how I see AI both disrupting, helping, and hurting that function, and give some framework there. And then with that background, then we can talk about the different types of learning that are essential for product teams to really unlock innovation. And then hit some case studies of putting those, into like practical terms, and then a Q&A. So that's kind of the agenda of what we'll go through. So I start with this. This is a definition of product management that I've worked on for almost 30 years now to understand this. But I've come to the belief that the core purpose of product management is as simple as this. It exists to find the intersection between customer value and business value, and then to stay in that intersection. And really the strongest indicator, if you're a for-profit business, the strongest indicator that you've found that intersection is sustainable, profitable revenue growth. That takes a long time sometimes to get there, right? So you also need their lead measures and things that tell you you're on the way. Now, if you're not a for-profit business, there are other indicators, right? There's still some purpose, some cause. There's still some intersection of what creates your ability to continue to invest in doing that thing and to delight the customer that you're trying to provide value to. And so it really comes down to what are those metrics that represent the stakeholders and the customer, and what is that intersection. And then I've also come to believe that learning is the primary mechanism for finding that intersection, that really everything you do is gated by how quickly you can learn toward finding and staying in that intersection. Recently, I put some thinking in to try to lay this out more easily for people to understand. And if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's concept of the golden circle, you probably are. If you're not, it's worth understanding. It's a very powerful and simple model for how to understand things. But this is the way I think about product management, is that in the center is that why. The why of product management is to find the intersection. How do you do that? The how is learning that leads to wisdom, that allows you to make good choices and have deep insights. The what are the tools that allow you to build the deliverables that allow you to execute and to guide that. And what's really interesting when you think about that, most people spend the most time thinking about the what, and the most important of this is the most important part of this is the why. And I'll lay it out a little more, I'll break it down a little farther. So we already talked about find the intersection of customer value and business value. If we look a little closer on what I mean by this how of learning and wisdom, on the left are just some examples, right? And I'll break these down more deeply as I go into here. I have come to believe there are really 4 categories of learning that are critical on product teams. It's what I call hygiene, discovery, de-risking, and optimization. We'll get into those more and break out what I mean by those. Each of those lead you to better judgment, better reasoning, better intuition, better influence. All of that aggregates into the wisdom of the product team. The what on this are things like, well, the product managers, they work in slides, they work in work management systems, they work in word processors and spreadsheets, they use user testing suites, they are increasingly using AI to help generate these things. Those are all the tools, and there's more tools than that, but those are all the tools. I gotta say, largely the tools are uninteresting. They're only interesting to the degree that they help you with the how and the why. And then those things lead you to the deliverables, right? Which is their PRDs, the different ways you define your product, the roadmaps, the wireframes, the user stories, on down the list of things that you deliver. Those things are important, that they're mechanisms for communication and execution. But the importance increases as you go to the left and decreases as you go to the right inside this framework. Now, what's interesting is when you overlay onto this, what is happening as AI gets interjected into product management. If we start way over on the right with the tools and with the what, it's experiencing high disruption, right? Most AI being applied to product management is around the tooling. It's around, can we help you generate content faster, because it's based mostly on generative AI still today, increasingly moving toward agentic AI, but a lot of generative AI. And so there's a lot of disruption there. And like, if you just look at the rate of change in the tool sets and what's available and things like that, it's great because it is actually helpful. A lot of these tools are impressive. Like I just read a report this morning before this meeting of a company, AirFocus. I have to tell you, I'm a little bit biased because when I was at Lucid, I acquired AirFocus and it's now part of Lucid, but I have been away for a little bit and was pleased to see that they just released a whole new feature set of allowing you to use AI to capture all of your customer insights, digest those into themes and patterns, and connect them to your roadmaps. Like, that's a cool use of AI in the context of the tooling and the context of the what. As you move over here toward the how, what's happening with AI there is both doing some good things and some bad things. It's doing some things that are helping to accelerate the speed of learning. Also, there's a really high risk that it is disconnecting product people from that learning. If you outsource all of the thinking to AI, you no longer gain the wisdom, the judgment, the reasoning, things like that. And so, and in times, it's actually leading you to learn the wrong things. And so in this how part of this, in this learning cycle, you're at a point today with AI where you have to use really good judgment about how to leverage AI to speed up the learning without separating you from the deep insights and understanding that you need to have. And in that context, I think AI is actually best as a thought partner. Rather than just than outsourcing all of the judgment and learning and wisdom. There's actually a lot of skepticism in the world of whether AI can even get to that point where it can have that wisdom and that good judgment, things like that. I'm pretty open-minded about it. I don't see it doing it today. I'm pretty open-minded that maybe it can get better. But for now, it's kind of a hit and miss. So you have to be very careful, use good judgment about how you apply AI in that middle bucket of the learning and wisdom. And then all the way to the left, what's really interesting here is that as the tool set experiences disruption, as you get some pros and cons in the how, it's actually putting more value and more pressure on this why. Like, the people who are really good at guiding all this to find the intersection, that skill set is being elevated. And as the ability to generate code, as the ability to do other parts of your business goes faster, there's more pressure on this why than ever before. Because it is not yet keeping up with the rate of change of the rest of the pipeline. And so I think that people who are really good at the why of product management will start to have increased premium value over time and how they do this. So that's a bit of a framework for how to think about just product management at the top, how I break it out, what the purpose is. And that's why you can see, to me, this concept of learning fast is so critical, because it's the how of finding the intersection. So, and then I make this statement again and again and again, which is all innovation is gated by your rate of learning. And so what you need to do is you need to learn fast and then get faster. But it's not just random acts of learning. It's very specific types of learning. So if we step into that, I've broken it down into these 4 categories of learning. These over time, depending on the size and scale of your company, over time, it becomes institutional learning for the company, institutional learning for the product team, for the R&D organization. But the 4 distinct types that need to just be constantly happening within your company. The first one I call hygiene. I call it hygiene because it's kind of like every morning you should brush your teeth and put on your deodorant. Every day you should experience this type of learning, which is doing something to get to know your customer better. I would expand this a little bit. Sometimes I get a little bit too succinct. I would expand this all to like kind of the market view and the competitive view. So every day you should be paying attention to, getting to know your customer better, learn your market better, understand the competition better. It should be daily behavior, just like brushing your teeth. The interesting thing about this, and you'll see I put a little asterisk on some of these other ones, the hygiene is really not a hypothesis-driven learning mode. It really is more experiential. I'm just spending time with these people. The more I spend time with them, the more I understand them. And so that's the loosest form of learning. The discovery one, you're probably familiar with the concepts of product discovery, and there's actually, all these have some overlap in the tools and mechanisms and what they do, but they are very focused modes of learning in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. Discovery, it's all about identifying opportunities, testing hypotheses, seeking value. Like, what is it that creates value for the business and for the customer? And a lot of that can be very hypothesis driven. The more it's hypothesis driven, the more valuable, the more structured, the more you will understand if you're doing the right learning. De-risking is a subset of this broader type of learning. It's really all about getting the risk out of things like feasibility, viability, usability, scalability, security, trust, safety, compliance. The basic premise of de-risking is, before I spend a ton of money, I'd like to have higher confidence that the investment will pay off. That's really the core of de-risking. And then optimization is really specific to parts of the customer's journey. It's about optimizing funnels, pricing, personalization, retention, things like that. That tends to be the more statistically driven portion of the learning cycles. It's where you see a lot of A/B testing. It's where you see a lot of that classic type of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily benefit every part of the product. It only benefits this really true optimization mechanism. But you can see on here, I've tagged those bottom three: discovery, de-risking, and optimization. Those should all be hypothesis-driven, scientifically structured type learning environments. So let me jump in and just walk through a few case studies of these. And so the first one, we talk about hygiene. One of the biggest recurring challenges for most companies is it can actually be quite hard to get time with your customer. And that experience is different if you're in a B2B world or a B2C world. For example, in a B2B world, your customers actually tend to be more invested in talking to you. And so that can be a little bit easier. If you're in a B2C world and you've got any kind of large number, customers may or may not care to talk to you, right? It may be hard to find them. But so the core challenge often in this hygiene type of learning is, how do you get the friction out of what it takes to talk to the right customer? And I have to emphasize that deeply. It is really important that you talk to the right customers, or you're going to get bad signal. I've had times in my career as a product person where I actually will map out, these are the customers, these are the people I will talk to, these are the people I will not talk to, because I know, regardless of how much kind of intellectual honesty I try to have, I will be skewed by the people I've talked to. I had a time I was working in the family history space, and there were a bunch of genealogists that really wanted to bend my ear on what we were building. My target customer was not genealogists. My target customer was ordinary people. And anytime a genealogist would approach me, I would just decline. I just wouldn't talk to them. And one day they got really mad at me. They cornered me. They got me in a room. They're like, "Why won't you talk to us?" And I said, because I don't think that the answer to the problem lies in the status quo. And they took a minute to process what I just said. And I think I tried to be as kind about it as I could, but that was the truth. It was like, I'm not talking to you because you do not represent the problems I'm trying to solve. And so you have to be really careful about who you talk to. And related to that, I always tell my teams, you get 0 points for talking to people that work for you. Now there can be some value. The value in, like if you're trying to refine a test before you put it out into the wild, well, maybe people internally can help you do that. But the learnings you get from people that are on your payroll versus learnings you get from people that are not paid by you are quite different. So I'm always super cautious about learnings derived from just talking to people down the hall. Okay, so here's a case study. So when I was at Ancestry, we had this problem, which is, how do you get the friction out of being able to just talk to customers? Now, Ancestry, your companies may be in different phases. Ancestry had millions of people hitting their site every month, and so it really high volume of people. So we stood up an on-site intercept where we would basically pop something up in front of a user in real time. We could filter a little bit ahead of time and be like, well, this is the type of user or the part of the product they're in when we catch them in their journey. It would just intercept and be like, hey, we'll give you a $100 gift card if you'll just spend the next 15 minutes talking to us about what you're doing today. And then we would get somebody lured in, and then we had a moderator and note taker. We did this every Friday. We had a moderator and a note taker. Those are the only people that the customer was aware were on the call. In the background, we had a wide open audience of any stakeholder that wanted to observe, but they could not engage with the customer. Only the moderator and note taker could be involved. And we actually succeeded getting many executives, including like the CEO and other people, to listen in on some of these calls, which is really helpful. The stakeholders, they could submit questions to the moderator. And so as they're listening to the conversation, they want the moderator to go deeper. They could like chat with the moderator and be like, hey, can you go deeper into this? And so we could give some guidance, give them the gift card, but it does require high site traffic, right? Like if you only have 10 people coming a day, you're like, this is probably not a great unlock for you. But it gave us a huge uplift in the company around just customer empathy, especially for those executives and gators. So that's one successful thing where we had high volume traffic. At Lucid, the team took a different approach. When I first got there, I saw that what I thought was like pretty low learning in this way. And so I challenged the team, and there was a woman named Lindsay on the team. I think she just wanted to make an acronym that was SQUIRREL. Well, I actually misspelled that. I'll have to go edit my size. That should be SQRL. But it stands for Scaled Qualitative Research and Learning. And so we had the same problem, right? Like Lucid is an interesting company because it has both a B2B and a B2C model. And so how do you get millions of people using the product to talk to you? And so we did an auto recruit via email. And basically the auto recruit setup, you could go in, you could basically fill out a profile. This is the type of customer I want to talk to. It would send emails to those customers offering some gift card for them to spend time with you. They could click on a thing, and the product managers, anybody on the product team, could basically just use Calendly and mark out time in the calendar and say, this hour, so Tuesday at 1 o'clock, I want to talk to a customer. This is the profile, and it would fill that slot for them. And so it took all the friction out of what it took for somebody on the team to be able to talk to a customer. So the auto scheduling was a huge unlock. And then we built behind that. They would take notes of the meeting, we'd transcribe them. This is a place where AI started speeding up. It would automatically transcribe, pull out summaries, things of the meetings. All of that synthesis then would be archived and to insights, and those insights would be fed into an AI memory. So that as we used AI for other things, it was automatically pulling from this big archive of customer conversations we've been having. We went from having just a few random customer interactions that were really hard to track to tracking every single customer interaction like this, to the point where the team now is having more than 3,000 of these types of conversations a year. And so they get pretty good ongoing signal on this hygiene thing. So the trick is to figure out really like, how do you get the friction out of what it takes to talk to a customer? Some of that depends on your volume, on how people discover you. If you're at low volume and a few people, like sometimes it's even like you walk into a coffee shop and find somebody, or you go, find a friendly customer and sit down in their office when you can. Sometimes you got to be creative. The idea is like chase the friction out. So there's zero friction for the product team to engage in this way for these type of hygiene learnings. Okay, so now let's talk about discovery, a case study on discovery. So the challenge here is like, how do you rapidly identify problems, unmet needs, understand resulting value, and validate the hypotheses of those things when you're doing your product discovery work? And in the past, like years ago, if you go back, 20 years ago, the gold standard for this was like really heavy ethnographic research. It got the best outcomes. There were long-lived learnings. It was super expensive. It took multiple quarters, took a long time. And what I discovered, because I was trying to figure out like, how do we still get good outcomes without having to every time spend so much time doing all this research? Like, can I take what is a 3-quarter process and turn it into a 2-week process? That led me to, something that I realized many companies, especially companies that have been running for a while, that have a lot of this hygiene learning happening, if they're capturing a lot of knowledge about the customer, you can actually fast track this, because you can do a process that I've defined, which I call product fundamentals, that's designed to accelerate this. And so you can do, instead of taking quarters, you can take a couple weeks. It's really similar to the concept of a design sprint, but it assumes that you have good ongoing hygiene happening, that you actually already know a lot about the customer, and you're not doing a research process. You're actually just consolidating learning and defining direction and testing out that direction. The key part of this, as you work with your teams, is you cannot disintermediate the team from the learning. If somebody else is learning and throws over a wall, somebody else, you're going to lose fidelity in that learning. You've got to keep the teams close to the learning. So let's talk about this. So at Lucid, other places that I've actually implemented this, probably at 4 or 5 different companies, the concept of product fundamentals. It's a 2-week time box approach. You insert all the context you know about your business, about the customer, stuff like that. Again, it requires on that hygiene being present. You lay out the customers, their pains and unmet needs. You define the resulting value of meeting those pains. Basically, if you could wave a wand, those things disappear, what would happen? Then you define possible solutions, the implied capabilities, the things that must exist for that solution to come to bear. Create value chunks, and that leads into your road mapping process. There's a much deeper explanation. I'd be happy to send a document I've written on how this process works to any of you that would like it. But the core part of this is the deliverables that come out of this process. They're very narrative in structure and very visual in format. And that process of having the deliverables of this discovery work be in a narrative and visual form pushes the learning to the maximum level. and is the best way to do that. And this is also a place where AI is leaning in pretty well. It can help a lot with the discovery. It can help with the synthesis. It can help with generating the artifacts and doing things like that. But again, you can't pull the team out of the loop. You can't just let AI do it because AI lacks the judgment, the reason, the understanding. And so AI can help you, but the team still has to lean in and guide and make sure they get the good outcome. Okay, so de-risking. De-risking is, I've gone so deep over my career. It's relative to these other types of learnings. I believe in all of them. I spent time in all of them. De-risking for me has become a place where I've gone deeper and deeper and deeper over time. And it's because as I increasingly run bigger and bigger product teams, I have to pay way more attention to the investments that we're making, and de-risking is critical here. So basically, it's the question is how do you minimize risk before large investments? And there's a playbook that I use with teams to do this, and then I'll show some case studies. But basically, the first step is to identify, what must be true in order for this to succeed. It's all the assumptions that have to work, right? It's we have to be able to make money. We have to be able to acquire customers. We have to solve this technological problem. You've got to brainstorm and be what is that list of all the things that must be true in order for this to succeed? Then you categorize that list into items that are either deal breakers. In other words, if this thing is not true, there's no opportunity. Many things will not be deal breakers. They're what I call path dependent risks. So if this thing isn't true, we just pivot this direction, we can keep going. And so I categorize it in those two ways, deal breakers and path dependent risks. Then we think about the sequencing and the prioritization based on the deal breakers and the potential impacts. And then we end up that way with kind of a prioritized list of things you have to prove out, things that you have to de-risk before you go forward. Put that into a matrix of de-risking options for each item. This is the unlock, this matrix. And so you identify all the tactics. So it's hey, for each thing we want to de-risk, if we gave ourselves a quarter to test this and de-risk it, what would we do? If we gave ourselves 1 month to do it, what would we do? If I gave ourselves 2 weeks, 1 week, or 1 day, how would we de-risk this thing? And this requires discipline of the team. But what I found in most teams in these de-risking questions, they have a bias to be conservative. They don't want to get it wrong. They're worried about the risk. And forcing them to mentally be well, what is the 1 quarter to 1 day time frame? Helps them realize there are many paths to learning and de-risking. And then you can push toward the shortest time horizon relative to the risk. Some questions deserve a quarter. Most questions don't. Most questions you should be much faster on, and many questions can happen in a day. And this is another one I'd be happy to share with you. My teams at Lucid, they were kind of nerdy. And so they built a thing they called the de-risking Enchiridion. I asked them to document all this, which basically it's about a 200-page slide deck that goes through all the types of risk and all the different methodologies we're aware of how to approach those risks and different scales and stuff like that. So we built it for ourselves internally. We scrubbed it a little bit to be able to share it publicly. And so it is something that we've shared publicly. So if that sounds interesting to you, shoot me an email. Happy to share it to you kind of one-off. Just know it wasn't built for broad distribution. It was more of a favor to people that knew we did this. But happy to share it with you and happy to engage. So let's talk about a case study. So how do you minimize risk before large investments? And I want to give you first a negative example. The negative example here is in a final, I was in a meeting working for a company. We're in this final, go, no-go meeting and the CFO was there, and he's the main stakeholder decision maker on this one. And we were proposing, a new product, a new packaging, how we do something. And he just loved the concept of this product. We believed that the primary opportunity was really as an efficiency and a cost cutter. He wanted to see it as a growth driver. And so without him having done any research, we've done a ton of research about why it is, what is that kind of thing. We've done all these de-risking things. In the course of about 15 minutes, we go from a plan which is all about cost cutting and efficiency to a plan which is growth, move from what we believe would be a $500K annual efficiency gain to what ended up being a $2 million annual loss. Because the CFO thought he was smarter than the rest of us, didn't do any de-risking, and just mandated that we go order a bunch of these and sell them. That's what happens when you don't de-risk. You go from saving money to spending money, potentially losing it. Here's another de-risking one. So Lucid, a product manager approached me. This is a small question, but a product manager approached me and said, do customers want to have emojis in our flagship product, Lucid Chart? And if so, what kinds of emojis would they like to have? It's a pretty small question, honestly. It's not something you spend a quarter. But I was trying to teach the team about these rapid de-risking principles. And so in the original plan, they said, well, we think we can go fast. Here's our fast plan, which is we're going to take an engineer, UX designer, and a PM. We're going to do a week. We're going to create a prototype. Then we're going to put the prototype out with people. Then we'll survey people. and get responses and analyze the responses. That was their plan. So it's going to take a week to 2 weeks with a few people involved to do that. I challenged them. I said, okay, well, I think you can figure out how to test it this afternoon without buying anything or writing any code. How would you do that? And they came back and we riffed on it a little bit. I'm like, well, why don't you just print out some sample diagrams, which are our primary uses to create diagrams. Print out some diagrams, buy some emoji stickers, and go find some customers and just sit down with them and give them printed sheets of diagrams and emojis and see what they do. And so they went and they did that, and they spent 2 hours in the afternoon in a coffee shop talking to people, and came back with really concrete belief on, okay, this is how we should do it and why. And the expense was 2 hours in a coffee shop, printing some things out, buying some emoji stickers. And so sometimes you got to get out of this mindset of like, we have to prototype everything in code, we have to do stuff like that and find shortcuts to do it. That learning, by the way, was 168 times faster than what they had proposed. And that's what I mean by like speed of learning. Like if we can do it 168 times faster, why would we not? And with less cost, and it makes a ton of sense. Here's another one. So at Vivint, they had this idea of, well, what if you could use facial and voice recognition to open the door? The idea is you would basically walk up to your front door and say, Vivint, open the door. And it would securely like check your voice and your face and unlock your door and open it and let you in. The idea was like you show up with groceries, your hands are full, how do you get into your door? So the team that was interested in this, their original plan, they thought, well, we'll take 4 engineers, a UX designer, a PM, we'll prototype this for 6 weeks, we'll buy about $5,000 in hardware, add that in, we think we can do it. And then a PM, UX designer, and an engineer for 2 weeks to go test this with customers. A similar question I challenged with them. I said, figure out how to test it this afternoon with buying anything without writing any code. And so they, to their credit, they came back, and what they did in the building that we worked in, we actually had built out a model home that had all of our technology in it. And they got some customers to come in, they were touring the building, things like that. And they basically they had a UX designer that stood outside the door and a PM that stood inside the door. And they told the customers, the people coming, they told them that we had already built this experience. And the customer would walk up and say, Vivint, unlock, open my door. And the PM would open the door, and the customer would walk inside. So there's like no code and other things. It's all manual. We're really just faking out the customer on the experience. But then what the team started doing is they started modulating the test. They started timing. They started not responding when the customers say open the door. They started putting in a delay. They would wait 2 seconds before they open the door and let the customer in. And what we realized is after about 2 seconds, the customer starts to feel insecure and question whether things are working. And we had already done the math on latency and what it would take to do this processing and stuff like that. And so we actually killed the project, because for a company whose primary value is peace of mind, introducing insecurity on your doorstep is a total no-go. But we were able to learn that, and we were able to understand without writing any code what the kind of psychological and emotional experience would be on a doorstep in these different cases that we could forecast might happen. And so the total time learning on that was about 6 hours. To get to a point where we had kind of hardened conviction on what we should or shouldn't do there. That was 224 times faster than the original plan. Let's talk about optimization a little bit. So the questions here, how do you optimize things like acquisition, retention, viral flows? Classic tools here are things like A/B tests, painted door tests, things like that. I don't know if you're familiar with painted door test. The idea is you build the front part of the experience. So basically you build like a landing page or a couple pages as if the whole product existed. And the classic painted door test tries to get the customer as close to the purchase psychology as possible, where you would even have them enter in a credit card. And then when they enter in the credit card, then you say something like, hey, this isn't yet available in your zip code or something like that. Sign up here on this list. We'll get back to you when it's available. It's actually, you have to be really careful with painted door tests, because it's not a very nice thing to do to a customer. You're basically like, it's a big bait and switch, right? You get them partway down a path and then you don't have an offering for them. But you can learn a ton very fast about the customer psychology, their interest in an offering, things like that. And so I think if used carefully, painted door tests can be quite effective. Okay, so here's a case study. So at Ancestry, we had this constant question of how do changes to our onboarding flows impact longer term retention? For a subscription business like Ancestry, this is an ongoing and very critical question. And we were and so the current state, when we started taking this on, asking, can we go faster? They would often do a test where we would basically We're testing, the onboarding flow relative to you get through a free trial and then do you retain for your first month after the free trial? That was the critical question to answer. Well, it would take 2 weeks to populate a test with enough people. Then they have to survive the 2-week free trial. Then you have to get to 1 month after that for their first renewal. And so, the minimum time to learning is 2 months, and maybe you could do 2 of those tests concurrently. And so we're really gated by we could only learn about 12 things a year. And in actuality, because of timing, sequence, stuff like that, we're probably only learning 6 things a year to try and improve this part of the experience. And we knew we needed to go faster. So we came up with a new plan. We engaged with our product analysts. We did a ton of math and figured some stuff out. And we realized that there was another metric that we felt like we could measure off. Or like we realized that there's a strong enough correlation between day one cancels and long-term retention that we could use it as a predictive measure of what would happen. So instead of measuring that first month renewal after their free trial, we began measuring the day one cancellations. So the day one cancellations were sufficiently predicted that we felt like we could use that to anchor on. We could get signal on day one cancellations way faster than we can on that 2-month cycle time of renewals. And so we switched from taking at a minimum 2 months to learn something to where we could learn something in 6 hours. We could build something, we stand up, we had enough volume of people coming into that to signing up that we could check out day one cancels. And then also because of that, we're able to get, because of just the math of how many people would come at the top of the funnel versus deeper in the funnel, we could do way more concurrent tests. And so we could do about 6 teams at a time concurrently. So you do all the math on that, then we get to a point where now we can learn about 300 things in a year instead of 12 things in a year. And then once we've nailed it, if we think it's a really critical test, we can always choose to let that test run longer and get to a 2-month or 3-month time frame if we want to. Most of them we didn't. Most of them we just did these day one cancel tests. The result of this, the making it basically 25 times faster to learn, allowed us to, in less than a year, we were able to increase that free trial survival curve by 15 points, not 15%, but like from 30% to 45%. It was a huge gain. And in fact, at the time, our head of marketing, who's also responsible for hitting the growth number, when he saw this, he's like, "You just hit my growth target for the year. Product did it all. Thank you for doing that." Now, we couldn't do that every year because it's not, but like in 1 year we did that and it was pretty critical. But it was a huge unlock, just that rate of learning for Ancestry and what we did in the business. Okay, so those are some examples. I can give many more examples, but I want to jump in to the Q&A. And I know Peter was good enough to write many questions on here. I'm happy to hit those, or if there's other ones that people want to hit real quick together, happy to jump in. If you don't have immediate questions, I'll go ahead and hit Peter's list. But anybody have any top-of-mind questions that we can jump into? For those of us who use AI as a tool rather than build it, what is the highest leverage way to point it at our own learning? And where does it quietly speed us toward the wrong answer? And I touched on that a little bit as we went through, but I'll recap on some of that. AI is great at building, and AI is great at aggregating and finding patterns. The highest value that I've seen so far is if you can load your strategic context into the AI's memory. So those are things like your learnings, your customer descriptions, your strategic goals, initiatives, like all the stuff that you put together about why you do what you do. If you can load in that strategic context, and then if you can constantly be feeding it with synthesized customer insights, those are things coming through, your help desk, through sales calls, things coming through your hygiene, learning, stuff like that. If you can load that in, that becomes a very valuable base of knowledge that then when you go engage with AI and ask it questions, it's way more grounded in the context of your business. You'll get better outcomes, better examples. And so that, to me, that is the highest growth. All that, again, is pushed down really mostly at that what and that golden circle thing of improving those tools, arming those tools with deeper strategic context is going to get way better outcomes when you do that. It's also, it's speeding up the whole what it takes to prototype. I used to have a thing, actually, when I would talk about this, I would talk about learning at the lowest fidelity possible. I still believe there's a lot of reasons why you should do that, but AI is making it so that you can learn fast at higher fidelity. And so your ability to spin up a prototype of a concept in minutes or hours is so much higher that in today's world, I remember that story I told you about the emojis. Should we put emojis into the product and how? The teams at Lucid could have done that in less than 30 minutes in real code in a real system. And so that starts to beg the question of well, do you do what Dan did, which is you print it out and give them stickies, to put on, or do you actually just like spend 30 minutes, spin up the prototype, and use that? You're going to get better fidelity learning from a higher fidelity prototype. And so it's really about like, where's the friction points? And in the past, there was friction to being able to build a quick prototype. That is getting smaller. So you'll see big speed. The underlying principle here is that you should try to learn within your medium. And if your medium is this code and this product, if you can do that cheap and low friction, you should do it. As soon as you introduce friction, then you've got to find a faster way to do it. The other caveat I would give to that point, though, is that customer psychology is different depending on the fidelity of what you show them. And sometimes you'll see that customers will be less willing to interject things that they perceive will cause change if it looks really polished. And so sometimes there's also a psychological benefit of showing them something that looks unpolished or something that looks low fidelity, because they're more willing to suggest change. It depends on the nature of your customer and kind of what their level of empathy is, things like that. But that's just one little gotcha in that equation. And then the next thing in here is the question, maximize speed of learning. It seems to only help if we're learning toward the right thing. And then there's the following, which is, how do you catch a fast signal that has drifted from what actually mattered before it is too late to correct? And that is part of why I tagged the discovery, the de-risking, the optimization with that asterisk of these should be hypothesis driven. That is what prevents you from just having random acts of learning and endless learning loops. You have a very specific hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove. And that keeps you very anchored. Those hypotheses are all within that broader context of what you're trying to do is find the intersection between customer value and business value. So if the learning that you're having, if the hypotheses don't ladder up to customer value and business value, and if your learning isn't anchored to a hypothesis, you're probably not being most efficient and effective in what you're learning. There's another really interesting thing in here that I loved in this question, which is, how do you catch a fast signal that you've drifted off? And I may take this a little bit from the initial intent, but in some of the learning questions you'll have, some of them can be hard to test well. Like, for example, if you do we did the post at Lucid and Ancestry, other places, basically did like a huge major refresh to the whole site. The number of things that change is very hard to like test them one at a time. It would take you years to test every change like that one at a time when you're doing a complete overall facelift to a site. So, or another one at Ancestry, we had done this machine learned algorithm for like generating family trees and stuff like that, and we wanted to introduce a new algorithm. But if you get it wrong, the stakes are really high. and it's a very hard thing to like A/B test or something like that. There's this principle that I learned actually from a space of orienteering. I don't know if you're familiar with orienteering, but it's basically the idea of like people do these races where you give them a map and a compass and they have to race to see who can navigate the course the fastest. One of the principles in orienteering, they have this idea of a catching feature. And so they'll look at the map and they'll be like, oh, I see there's a river a mile this way. I can run as fast as I want until I hit that river. And I don't have to look at my map or my compass. I just know I run to that river. If I hit the river, I went too far. And you can actually find similar catching features and things like this. And so you can, in that change of introducing a new machine learned algorithm for generating trees, we knew what the key metrics were of what tree behavior should look like as you interact with them. And then it all becomes like, how quickly can you recover from a problem? So instead of doing an A/B test, we said, no, we're going to introduce the new algorithm. We're going to watch these metrics, and we've built in the ability to roll back to a safe place within minutes. And so that allowed us to go fast. We can introduce the algorithm, whatever we wanted. We'd watch the metrics. If the metrics ever went south, immediate rollback to a known good state. And so that's another way to like deal with those big bulk level changes. But it's really important to have those catching features and a safe way to roll back to deploy that strategy. Okay.
Dude, one thing about that is so when I wrote these questions and the things that you're talking about right now, I think they just really become exponentially more important when you start using AI as a tool in helping develop your products and things like that, because it's super awesome when it's used the right way, but it still hallucinates, it makes mistakes, it's not reliable, there are a lot of variables involved. So when you're using AI and you don't have, like the self-imposed guardrails that you suggested, like with the river, that's an excellent example. If you don't have guardrails in place, the mistakes just happen so much quicker using AI. And that's kind of what I was referencing to in this.
But you're exactly right. You have to have those guardrails, and if you have the guardrails, you can go fast. Two things: the guardrails and the ability to roll back to a known good state. That's on the building side. That you still have this challenge, which is in that the how part, which is in the learning. Like you cannot, like you still have to have humans that have the wisdom, that have the judgment, that make sure that what AI is recommending is good things, align with your strategy, align with your business, that you're making good intuitive decisions. And so that's the part that's the hardest, I think, is keeping people tied into the learning and the rate of change in the AI of what's happening. And so, like when AI first got turned on at Lucid, and we started using it this way, I would get like these 30-page reports 2, 3, 4 times a day from product people who would just post some question to AI and it generated a report on what it thought we should do. They were worthless. Like I was like, one, like I'm not going to read 30 pages to understand your question, and people were trying to impress me with thud factor, and then I would read through it. I'm like, this is not you. Your brain is smarter than this. And so it's okay if they want to use AI as a thought partner. It's okay if they want to generate that 30-page report, read through it, think critically about it, find what's right and what's not right, refine it, and get to the next level. That's great if it speeds up their thinking. But just generating that report and not thinking through it and double checking it is going to land you in a bad place. Okay, so there's this other question here, which is around like this thesis is framed around business results. But sometimes you're not a for-profit business, right? Maybe you're an artist, maybe you're working in a nonprofit setting like that. When I actually first started to put together the underlying framework behind this, I was working for a nonprofit, and our targets were not financial. Our targets were, people engaging and contributing to a knowledge base, basically. You basically though take like what is it you're trying to solve for? There's a value equation in there. There's a value equation between what you're trying to do, what your stakeholders need, and what you're trying to get other people to do. It's finding that value equation. And so you swap out some of the metrics, right? It's no longer about profitable revenue growth. It's about growth of a knowledge base. It's about engagement. It's about people's lives changing. Whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, those become your metrics. And then there is usually like a value equation of like, in order for you to be able to continue providing that service, you have to hit some targets for people to continue to invest or for you to be able to have the resources to do it. And so there still will be a value equation, even if it's not your classic, retention, revenue, things like that. There's something that makes it so you can continue to offer the service and people are willing to continue to invest on the stakeholder side. And so customers will continue to engage and help toward whatever that common united end is. I think the question here is around like running more loops. It's not always the same as learning more. And a team can iterate quickly and only ever confirm what it already believed. This one drives me crazy. I've actually seen this, and I have a few. I'm generally a very kind, optimistic person. I have a few things that'll get me going. If I see this behavior, I have like very little tolerance for just like iterating on the same question. I'm like, you guys, how long is it going to take you to learn this thing? And I find that a big part of this is that hypothesis-driven learning mindset, right? Is like, are you proving or disproving a specific thing? And that makes it a more concrete question of just these loops and cycles. The other thing that I've seen is sometimes when you get into these cycles where you're just like proving the same thing out again, people for some reason, there's two things I see happen. One is people actually, they're just afraid. They're afraid of getting it wrong. And that may be unintentionally caused by you or other people in the business. You may have created an environment where people are afraid to take chances. And so that's one thing I'd watch for is ask yourself that question, are you the problem of why people are afraid to move forward past this question? The second one is, are they asking the wrong question? That's the other thing that is most likely to get in this loop. So there's three things. Hypothesis driven. Are you somehow creating pressure that makes them afraid to learn or to make a decision? And then are they asking the wrong question? Those are the three most likely contributors to this. And then I totally agree with this. I've come to deeply value kind of the checks and balances within the company. Like if I don't have a CFO pushing back on me, like I'll tell you, like my most recent experience was at Lucid. I loved my relationship with our CEO. He was incredibly detail-oriented, risk-averse. He and I started on every question at almost opposite ends of the spectrum. And I loved it. The reason I loved it was because I realized there's not it freed me up to do my best, most creative thinking, because I knew there was not a world where this guy would let me do something dumb. And so I just stopped asking myself that question. I was like, no, I'm just going to let my brain go wherever it can go and be as creative and strategic and as audacious as I can, because I trust that Dave will never let me get away with doing something stupid. And I used it in that way, and so I like it gave me like broad permission to, and I did some of my, I think, my best, most creative, strategic work because of that. And so I like when I bump into these checks and balances, I don't regret them. I embrace them. And I look at how do I use this almost like a catching feature for me. Like that's what I do with Dave. I'm like, Dave is a huge catching feature. He will never let me do something dumb. That means I can go as crazy as I want in my thinking, and he'll be a great filter for me. Well, I hope that it's giving you some food for thought on the basic thing that I hope that if there's two things you'll take away, one, your innovation is gated by your speed of learning, so learn to learn fast. And two, there are probably a lot of tactics that you've not yet thought of how you can get friction out, of how to optimize that speed of learning, and a little creative thinking can go a long way for cycling. And you also see in this, maybe a third thing you can see, I actually really like to measure it. I really like to measure my speed of learning. And when I see big wins, like, hey, we figured out an unlock that was 200 times faster in how we learn, I celebrate that. I celebrate with the team, and I reinforce that behavior, because if I can learn 200 times faster, I can outposition my competitor. I can do so many more things if I can learn faster. So, anyways, thank you all for your time. There were a few things I know that I offered. If you want to follow up either on that de-risking Enchiridion or that document that describes that product fundamentals, how to rapidly do the kind of consolidated discovery work, any of those types of things, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to share those with you individually. It's where I started. Like, I exist right now. My purpose is to help accelerate people doing these types of things. And so if I can help you, I'm in. I will help you. So, Christina, I think that's the end of what we got going on today.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.